2013, a government committee was established under Cameron, given the official title, the Interministerial Group on Migrants' Access to Benefits and Public Services. Now, you might think that that group is to make sure that migrants can access the benefits that they need. You would be wrong, because the group's original title was the Hostile Environment Working Group, and its role is to find ways to limit access to benefits. Its sole purpose is to make Britain a hostile environment for migrants. Now, in order to present that lie of white kids as race victims, you have to do some quite clever manipulation of the statistics, because white kids are now the failing group, and it changes policy. So here is a policymaker, a policy advisor, talking on the basis of free school meal data. On the basis of data only about free school meal kids, he made the following statement. Why is it that white kids are doing so much worse? We have to tackle that as a society. For the future of Britain, it obviously matters more to tackle white underperformance just because there are more white people. Now, after making these comments, Dr. Leunig was promoted. He was made the Chief Analyst and Senior Ministerial Policy Advisor at the Department for Education. So this is not some guy on Twitter in the wee small hours just throwing out some opinion. This is the guy who tells ministers what statistics mean. This is how far the perversion of those statistics has gone. And of course, if white kids are the underachieving group, who needs race equality? So under the coalition government between 2010 and 2015, race equality funding in schools was no longer ring-fenced. It could be spent on anything. Many parts of the country reduced or completely cut their support for ethnic minority achievement. And within the first year of the coalition, every national programme that had been intended to support the recruitment and retention of black and minoritised teachers, every programme was cut, disappeared.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching from. Welcome back to my YouTube space. In today's video, I'm going to talk about race and education, the ways race and systemic bias have been mispresented to or downplayed. Now, I've come across academics or professors who have talked about this, and they have shed light on a lot of things that we need to know as black people, and we need to know how race or for example, British schools and systematic racism is hand in hand, or how it's being played. I've come across speech of someone like Dr. Nicola Rolock, and she is known for her landmark research on the experiences of black female professors in the UK and her critique of institutional racism in university. I've come across Dr. Remy Joseph. He focuses on race, education, and policing in schools. Now, he has written a book like Black Mixed Race Men, which he has research on racial inequalities in schools, critique how race is handled in UK education policy. In today's video, I'm going to share with you a speech of Professor David Gilborn, a very, very good speech where he focuses on critical race theory, race and education in the UK. He has written a book like Racism and Education, Coincidence or Conspiracy, and he has exposes systematic racism in British schools, and that's what we are going to react on it today. But I want you to listen to this video because it's a very nice video and very educative, and I hope we are going to get one or two things from here, and we'll come back and react about it.
I'd like to start by thanking the Institute for Liberal Arts and Sciences for inviting me to contribute to the Grand Challenge lecture series. It's quite unusual for somebody who works on race to be invited to speak at a more general series, because there's a tendency to assume that if you work on race, you're too political or too specialised or too something to actually address a kind of mainstream audience. So it's quite interesting when, as a race scholar, you get invited into certain places that you don't often get an invite. You might work out why I don't get an invite in a few minutes. So I'm particularly going to focus on education, but also the wider racialized politics, particularly in England. And obviously that's necessary because you can't understand race equality in education without understanding the racial politics in the wider context. So on that note, I want to start with a quotation from Primo Levi, a man who survived Auschwitz. And he said, when reflecting on the Holocaust, "We cannot understand it, but we must understand from where it springs, and we must be on our guard. If understanding is impossible, knowing is imperative, because what happened could happen again. Consciences can be seduced and obscured again, even our consciences." Now, I think we're living in a period that is probably the most dangerous since the end of the Second World War. Behind a facade of fairness and a concern for social justice, policy is increasingly authoritarian, and anti-racism is portrayed as a negative, even a racist movement in its own right. So what I'm going to talk about, first of all, I'm going to say something about race and racism, words that are often misunderstood and misused, frequently deliberately so. Then I'm going to look at racism in education, in particular how an image has been created of white people as the new victims of racism, and then how that image is used to close down anti-racism. And in the final part of the talk, I'm going to say something about hate, racism, and the state. I'm going to look at the violent and exclusionary thinking that shapes debates and steers public policy, because the only thing more dangerous than racist individuals is when racism becomes the kind of political mainstream, when it just becomes the mood music behind which everything else takes place. So, usually when policymakers and commentators talk about these kinds of issues, it's common to focus on the minority, to ask what's different about them. What have they got to do in order to fit in? Now, those questions make two key assumptions. First of all, they adopt a deficit view of the minoritized group. There's something wrong with them. They are the problem. They are going to have to change. The unrecognized flip side of that assumption is the counter-assumption that the majority is absolutely fine, that the majority are kind of disinterested bystanders. They're not part of the problem. They'll just watch as these things are solved in front of their eyes. I work from a position that reverses that. So my work looks at how inequality and injustice usually arises from the actions of the majority. In particular, how racism operates on a day-to-day, everyday level. But before I go any further into the analysis, I need to say something about those key terms, race and racism. Now, it's very widely accepted that there is no such thing as race. Many of you will have been in schools and seen posters that say there is only one human race. The editors of Nature Biotechnology put it this way. This is a nice quote. "Pooling people in race silos is akin to zoologists grouping raccoons, tigers, and okapis on the basis that they're all stripy." Because the things that human beings take to denote race are superficial and arbitrary. The things that humans have decided denote race are entirely superficial and arbitrary, just like raccoons and tigers are stripy. So what? It doesn't mean they're the same thing. That's the kind of thinking that lies behind centuries of racist classification. The problem is that society behaves as if there really are separate and distinct human races, even though it's been clearly demonstrated that there are no such things. So because society behaves as if there is such a thing as race, simply avoiding the word race doesn't mean that you've done anything about the process of racism. Now, anytime you raise the issue of racism, it's always going to be politically sensitive, and it's usually a lot more complicated than many people recognise. Now, traditionally, racism is associated with crude, obvious acts of race hatred and discrimination. Certainly when white people hear the word racism, they think of people like that. They think of skinheads, violent, aggressive, obvious hatred. But racism isn't always that obvious. Critical researchers have shown that racism also operates in ways that are often very subtle. The people that are involved in racist acts might be entirely unaware of their role. They may even be very well intentioned. They may think that what they're doing is going to deconstruct the very processes that they're actually part of. So that raises a key question, which is, well, if you can't go on the basis of what people say they're doing and why they're doing. Asking someone's intentions is not going to tell you if they're involved in these processes. How do you know when something is racist? Critical research says, well, actually the answer is quite easy. You look at the impact. You look at the effects of processes. So if a process systematically disadvantages one or more minoritized groups, it's a racist process. And then you have to start deconstructing. How did it get to be like that? What can we do in that situation? Because good intentions don't always have good outcomes. Now, I took the title for my talk today from the front page of the Daily Mail in April 2016, Betrayal of White Pupils. This is a particularly striking example of a recurrent theme in the British media, but also in British political discourse. In education, the last few years have become dominated by the idea that the underachieving group in education are white working class students. In fact, white working class boys. It's one of the first times in history that possessing a white skin and a penis is seen as a disadvantage. Now, these are just a succession of headlines that actually go all the way back to 2008. And they show you this incessant repeating of white students as the educational failures. It's become common sense. Whenever I stand up to talk about racism, someone will say, but white people are the lowest achieving group. What are you talking about? It's just become completely accepted. Now, in order to present that lie of white kids as race victims, you have to do some quite clever manipulation of the statistics. And I know that statistics turn a lot of people off, but as a result of that, statistics are actually quite important, because I can show you examples where statistics are used as evidence of something, but if you actually look at the table, it doesn't say what the commentary says, but most people don't look at the table. If the commentary says this table shows X, most people tend to go, okay, I agree, excellent. So the fact that statistics have been manipulated so carefully and so powerfully is really important. So I want to take about 5 minutes to explain to you why white pupils are not the lowest achieving group. So the next time you hear this, you can go, I'm sure I've heard something about this before. There are 3 parts in creating this lie. The first is you have to absolutely forget about how most students in school achieve. That's really important. So this graph shows the proportion of kids in the main ethnic groups, the proportions that get 5 or more higher grade passes, including English and maths. So this is one of the key measures of educational achievement. And I've highlighted in red the white British group. Now, as you can see, they're about in the middle. They're by no means the highest achieving group, but they are not the lowest achieving group either. On average, White kids tend to do better than their peers of Pakistani ethnic origin, the Black Caribbean group, students of mixed race, where one parent is white, one Black Caribbean, and also much better than kids with a Gypsy Roma traveller background. This is the achievement of all kids in maintained schools. The only kids who aren't counted here are the ones in private schools. Kids in private schools have been removed pretty much from all education statistics. And that obviously depresses the overall achievement of white kids, but nobody ever mentions that. So if you look at the achievement of all the kids in school, white British kids are by no means an underachieving group. So you have to forget about that. If you want to go along with the Daily Mail headline, you have to only look at a section, a fragment of the school population. And what they do is to focus in on kids in receipt of free school meals. So these are kids in the most pronounced social disadvantage. And if you take out of these statistics everybody except those in receipt of free school meals, the achievement in every group goes down, but the white group goes down more proportionately than anyone else. Just looking at free school meals kids makes a big difference on white achievement. But as you can see, we're still not there because there are groups, Gypsy Roma traveller students, do persistently much less well than white British groups, even if you only focus on kids getting free school meals. So what you have to do as the next part of creating the lie is really clever. You have to forget about them. You just don't talk about them. So the vast majority of official reports, news reports, when people talk about white kids as the underachieving group, they're simply ignoring the existence of Gypsy, Roma and traveller kids. They're just not mentioned. And then you have to do something that's even more powerful, because these statistics on kids in receipt of free school meals aren't described in that way. These kids are described as working class. Now, that could be an entirely innocent attempt to make the numbers more accessible. Students in receipt of free school meals is a bit of a mouthful. Saying that they're working class kind of makes the statistics more accessible. The problem is it absolutely perverts the message that is being given. Because, it's all right, most adults in this country describe themselves as working class. About 60% of British adults describe themselves as working class. And that figure's been pretty consistent for the last 30 years. So when you produce a headline that says white working class are the lowest achieving group, you're telling 60% of the population that their children are suffering. But free school meals don't cover anything like 60% of the population. They cover about 14% of the population. So that slippage in language is really crucial. Because when free school meal data is cited as if it describes the working class, what happens is that data on the most disadvantaged 14% is being presented as if it describes more than half the population. The majority of people who think of themselves as working class are not in these statistics, and yet they're being told that their children are the ones who are suffering in school. And this matters not because it's breaking some obscure rule of statistics. This matters because it's changing education policy. It's impacting on the lives of every student and every teacher. Because the focus on free school meal white kids is obscuring all of those wider inequalities. So the fact that Pakistani, Black Caribbean, mixed race white, Black Caribbean, Gypsy Roma traveller kids persistently do less well in education has been erased. That's just gone because white kids are now the failing group. And it changes policy. So here is a policy maker, a policy advisor, talking on the basis of free school meal data. On the basis of data only about free school meal kids, he made the following statement. Why is it that white kids are doing so much worse? We have to tackle that as a society. For the future of Britain, it obviously matters more to tackle white underperformance just because there are more white people. Now, after making these comments, Dr. Lunig was promoted. He was made the Chief Analyst and Senior Ministerial Policy Advisor at the Department for Education. So this is not some guy on Twitter in the wee small hours just throwing out some opinion. This is the guy who tells ministers what statistics mean. This is how far the perversion of those statistics has gone. And of course, if white kids are the underachieving group, who needs race equality? So under the coalition government between 2010 and 2015, race equality funding in schools was no longer ring-fenced. It could be spent on anything. Many parts of the country reduced or completely cut their support for ethnic minority achievement. And within the first year of the coalition, every national programme that had been intended to support the recruitment and retention of black and minoritised teachers, every programme was cut, disappeared, within the first year of the coalition government. And this is not a misunderstanding. It's not an accident. Policymakers know all of this stuff that I've just laid out for you. In 2014, the Education Select Committee produced a report specifically on the issue of white underachievement. The research centre that I direct at Birmingham, we wrote evidence about this. I went down and did that question and answer thing with them. And in their official report, they accept that it doesn't make sense to call free school meal kids working class, because that would mean that 85% of kids are middle class or higher. So that's crazy. They accept that on page 8. By page 10, they decide that actually we're going to go ahead and do it anyway, for the sake of what they call pragmatism. So they accept those statistics don't say what we think they say, but now we're going to keep saying it anyway. And so obviously, as a result of that, when their report is published, it kicks off another round of newspaper stories about why is it that white working class kids are doing so badly, what do we need to do to improve the achievement of white working class kids. Yet more headlines about how awful all the race equality stuff has been. The consequences of all this for race equality are serious and lasting, because race equality concerns are now defined as, at best, irrelevant, and at worst, the cause of white working class failure. And this last point is vital. Anti-racism is not just seen as unnecessary, it's now seen as anti-white and as causing racism. So a wide range of voices have rushed to condemn anti-racism. Critics include Ofsted, who imagine that teachers are so dedicated to anti-racism that they may have felt discomfort in addressing the needs of white kids. A past Teacher of the Year reported by the right-wing Centre for Social Justice, complaining that white kids are ignored and humiliated in schools who are too keen to promote positive images of minority communities at their expense. And a university professor, a past joint president of the UCU, so the union that I'm a member of, who wrote an article all about how awful it was that the University of Birmingham had set up a centre, the Centre for Research in Race and Education that I direct, and in particular, how terrible it is because we use an approach called critical race theory, which means that we put a focus on white racism at the heart of what we're doing. He described CRT as, and I quote, a nice little earner, because no one can actually be genuinely interested in race equality. There must be an ulterior motive. And he argued that by attacking racism, CRT causes permanent hostility between racialized groups. So in this world, things are turned on their head. Anti-racists are troublemakers. And the people that attack race equality, that becomes a badge of honor. It's a sign that the speaker is courageous. They're denouncing political correctness. So the perfect piece of inverted logic, the only true advocate of racial harmony is someone who attacks anti-racism. So during a select committee meeting, a Conservative MP branded any positive action for race equality as necessarily racist. Now, borrowing a term used by Patricia Williams, one of the leading African-American legal scholars, I've tried to kind of capture what's going on here, and I've called it the monsterization of race equality. So you take an idea like race equality and you distort it, you twist it until it becomes a monster. It's monstrous, it's threatening, it's out of control, everyone is in danger. So the process starts by you say, well, of course we care, we want to improve things for everyone, but actually race inequality is ignored or explained away. You're challenged, well, have you thought about this? Have you checked for this? Isn't it really about social class? Meanwhile, white people are presented as race victims, and that situation is blamed on anti-racism. And by doing that, you silence anti-racist criticism, because to be anti-racist is to be racist against white people. And that prepares the perfect context where even more racialized inequality can grow and be sustained, because you're not allowed to talk about it. Because any concern for race equality is necessarily troublemaking, anti-white, and racist. And this leads me on to the final part of the analysis, which is where I want to talk about the role of hatred. And it's important to say that this goes beyond a few nasty individuals. So I want to talk in particular about groups of people acting in unison, large swathes of the media, politics, and in particular many well-funded think tanks that pop up on the Today programme and Newsnight, and you're very rarely told anything about who funds them or where they come from. And the state itself has now become a key player in this. It's often impossible to see which comes first, whether it's the hatred and animosity on the streets, in newspapers, or in Parliament. But there's no doubt that these things are linked and tend to feed on each other. You can see a kind of cycle of hatred repeating and being amplified. Now, it's been well established that there was a surge in racist incidents following the Brexit referendum in 2016. By its very nature, violent, aggressive racism can't be measured precisely. But the pattern is very clear. The National Police Chiefs Council reported a 500% increase in reported incidents just in the week following the EU referendum. Tell Mama, an organisation that opposes Islamophobia, received, in 3 days following the referendum, they received the equivalent of a month's worth of complaints. And, of course, that hatred finds its way directly into classrooms. So the Times Educational Supplement, looking at the period between the EU referendum and the election of Donald Trump, found a 50% increase in the number of times that police had been called into schools to deal with a hate crime. Now, before anyone asks, I should make it clear that I'm not saying that the referendum result was entirely based on racism. I am saying that racist sentiment and fear-mongering played a huge role in the debates that led up to the referendum and are playing a systematic role in shaping policy after the referendum. Leave campaigners often argue that Brexit isn't about racism, it's about sovereignty. But it's very often difficult to actually tell the two apart. The Daily Express would probably argue that its anti-immigration stance is merely a call for sensible, thoughtful controls. But if we look at a selection of front page headlines. Just from the month leading up to the referendum, you get a very different story. You get a story screaming from front page headlines using words like threat, soaring numbers, crisis, and invasion. So it's not really surprising that racists felt empowered the day after the Brexit referendum, when this is the hysterical, hate-fueled context within which the referendum took place. As Simon Woolley has put it, the Brexiters, with their jingoistic rhetoric, have put the country on a war footing. By framing the debate as we want our country back, they have made immigrants the enemy and occupiers who need to be expelled. And it gets worse. Because the hatred is now mainstreamed. Hatred is now state policy. The violent and obvious hatred seen in post-Brexit assaults is not the whole story. If you like, it's the kind of tip of a bigger iceberg, an iceberg of racist sentiment that shapes mainstream debate and is driving policy across numerous areas of life. Of course, the language tends to be more measured, but the core meaning and impact on people's lives is the same. The anger, the fear, the violence is often coated in a kind of intellectual facade. So, in January 2016, David Cameron, who was Prime Minister at the time, seems a long time ago, announced a £20 million scheme to teach English language skills to Muslim women. The proposal embodied long-standing deficit views of Muslim women as passive, as isolated, as lacking in skills, as lacking in motivation, as just lacking. Cameron argued that this move symbolised a wider shift away from what he called passive tolerance. He said, all too often, because of what I would call passive tolerance, people subscribe to the flawed idea of separate development. We will never truly build one nation unless we are more assertive about our liberal values, more clear about the expectations we place on those who come to live here. So although he talks about liberal values and breaking down barriers, the thrust of his speech and the related policy moves have been clearly disciplinary. This is not passive, and it's not tolerant either. So a few examples. In 2013, a government committee was established under Cameron, given the official title, the Interministerial Group on Migrants' Access to Benefits and Public Services. Now, you might think that that group is to make sure that migrants can access the benefits that they need. You would be wrong, because the group's original title was the Hostile Environment Working Group, and its role is to find ways to limit access to benefits. Its sole purpose is to make Britain a hostile environment for migrants. This approach became a central thrust of Theresa May's 2014 Immigration Act. She said, and I quote, "Most people will say it can't be fair for people who have no right to be here in the UK to continue to exist as everybody else does, with bank accounts, with driving licenses, and with access to rented accommodation. We're going to be changing that because we don't think that is fair." Now, notice that even within such a brief quotation, fairness is cited as the motivation twice. In order to be fair, we have to make Britain a hostile environment. And Theresa May followed through on this. So the government now receives regular reports on how well the measures are working, how hostile Britain is now becoming. And that idea of hostile environment is now in the title of some of these reports. It's no longer in the kind of subtext, it's there on the title page. Now, it's easy to see hatred when it's paraded as nasty tweets or offensive opinions in a tabloid. It's much harder to see it when it's wrapped in the kind of mundane language of policy. Katie Hopkins has made a career out of being obnoxious and what she would no doubt call, just like Toby Young calls his opinions, provocative. So in 2015, the Sun newspaper carried an article by Katie Hopkins where she said, and I quote, "I don't care. Show me pictures of coffins, show me bodies floating in water, play violins, and show me skinny people looking sad. I still don't care. Some of our towns are festering sores plagued by swarms of migrants and asylum seekers, shelling out benefits like monopoly money. Make no mistake, these migrants are like cockroaches. Bring on the gunships, force migrants back to their shores and burn the boats. As it turns out, I do care. I care passionately about British truckers and taxpayers." 200,000 people signed a petition calling on Hopkins to be sacked. But not only was she not sacked, she wasn't even censured by the Independent Press Standards Organisation, who said, and I quote, "Migrants as such are not a group that can be discriminated against." So we have the crazy, obnoxious Hopkins, but we have a system of so-called checks and balances that when the loonies come out goes, well, there's nothing we can do. That's absolutely fine. You can't discriminate against migrants. That's not a group that can be discriminated against. Also, the government, just like Hopkins, cites taxpayers as a driving force behind its position. And also, like Hopkins, the government seemed to have run out of compassion. In 2016, at the height of public outrage about a child's body washing up on a shore, of course we must do something. We're Britain. We care. Of course we care. So the government said at the height of that, we're going to accept 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees under what was known as the Dubs Amendment. But by 2017, when the heat has died down, when we're not seeing pictures of children's bodies, they announced, well, actually, we're going to wind that up. We'd received 200 children, and there was a plan to take another 150. So the initial announcement says 3,000 unaccompanied children. By the end, well, we've done our bit if we bring in 350. Now, this spirit of petty vindictiveness echoes the English poor laws and the punitive actions against what were called the undeserving poor. So certain people are judged less worthy, less human. They're treated in systematically hostile and degrading ways. And this approach extends beyond refugees, beyond migrants, and beyond race. Victims of child abuse can be denied compensation if they've been found guilty of criminal offences, including drink and drug abuse. And the government justify this on the basis that the individual may have caused distress, loss or injury to another person and cost the taxpayer money through a police investigation or court proceedings. So we have all the hand-wringing and the stereotyping around child abuse in Rotherham, but we have no public debate about the fact that the victims of that child abuse may lose their compensation if they're found guilty of an offence related to drug or drink, because that's okay, because we're protecting the interests of the taxpayer. Other examples include the threat to remove benefits from people who refuse certain treatments for what are judged to be inappropriate weight or their use of drugs. And in 2015, we had the revelation that around 90 people a month were dying after being declared fit for work and losing benefits. I think I've got ahead of myself. Sorry, I get wound up. I can't keep the PowerPoint back. The reason I keep putting up PowerPoints is that if you don't evidence it, people don't believe you. You actually say this stuff without the evidence. You're told that you're being melodramatic, that you're over the top. And as this last quotation shows, even when you show the evidence, the government go, 90 people a month dying after we've taken them off benefits. Well, that doesn't mean anything, does it? You can make statistics say anything. And they only published that statistic when they were forced into it through the actions of the Information Commissioner. And of course, this atmosphere isn't restricted to the UK. In Europe, migrants can be stripped of their jewellery to pay the cost of their resettlement. And of course, in the USA, Donald Trump's popularity rose when he pledged to ban Muslims from entering the country. And we've seen how the far right have been emboldened under Trump's presidency. But as I noted at the start, the face of racism isn't always as obvious as this. The right-wing think tank Policy Exchange has taken racist intellectualizing to a whole new level. Policy Exchange describes itself as the UK's leading think tank. You will often see politicians giving big keynote speeches in front of a backdrop that says Policy Exchange all over it. Policy Exchange declares an income of about £2 million a year. It benefits from charitable status, and it doesn't declare the identity of any one of its funders. In 2017, Policy Exchange published a report entitled "Racial Self-Interest is Not Racism." David Goodhart, their head of demography, integration and immigration, argued that the challenge here is to distinguish between white racism and white identity politics. The latter may be clannish and insular, but it's not the same as irrational hatred, fear, or contempt for another group, the normal definition of racism. And he went on to argue that the liberal reflex to tar legitimate majority grievances with the brush of racism risks deepening Western society's cultural divides. Now that all sounds a bit complicated and a bit highfalutin and almost intellectual. What's happening here is that racism is being defined in the most narrow way possible, as irrational hatred. Unless you are a knowing, hate-fueled bigot, you can't possibly be a racist, according to the gospel of David Goodhart. If white people argue for their own interests above those of every other group, simply on the basis of being white people, then, according to Goodhart, this is legitimate identity politics. And you better not call people racist, because then they'll get really angry and then they'll really start doing some stuff. So it all sounds thoughtful, pseudo-intellectual. The report is called Ethno-Demographic Interest. I mean, it sounds kind of scientific. But the consequence is that white people are free to say and do pretty much whatever they like in order to protect their own self-interest. And any anti-racist objections are dismissed as not just misplaced, but actively dangerous, because they'll cause trouble, because they'll be then fueling even more legitimate white grievances. Okay.
Welcome back to my YouTube space. Now, we have learned a lot of stuff from this video. It's a very good video, and personally, I have learned a lot, how white victim is being created, how systematic racism is being played in schools, you know, the inequalities, how it has started, and how it is. Professor Gilbon has spoke a lot. Of course, I've listened to a number of speech from some professors, but this one is one of the top tier videos that I thank God for coming across it. Now, as we have heard from the video, white victim is being created so that we can bring about the inequalities, so that we can put all our eyes on white students. From the video, or from the point of professor, I get it like the white people or white students are being victimized, and white working class are being said that your children are doing bad in schools, you know, your boys or your children are oppressed, and they'll be told this narrative like working class boys or children are failed, or they have failed terribly in schools, and this will create this tension that we need to focus more on our boys, on our white boys. And they will tell you this narrative like what is making them to fail is because of we are focusing so much on anti-racism. So that's where it all started. They create a problem and they say, this is how we are going to solve this problem. We are going to focus now on our white boys because these minorities are the one who are making our white children to fail. Get it from there. So I think creating this white victim, it affects black students so much. Creating a white victim, it affects black students so much. From what I have understood from this video is that when white students are framed as the new victims of educational policies, it shifts attention away from minorities, from the very real and persistent disadvantages faced by black students. You know, we now live to focus. We are not now focusing on anti-racism. We are now not focusing on the real issue, on the racism, and we start focusing on these white boys or white children that are being said they are failing because of how the system is. Now we will have something like lower teacher expectation, harsher discipline, and this leads to policy and resources decision that neglect and marginalize black students' needs. You know, and that's what is all about, this victimizing or creating a white victim, and it's all lies. It's all lies. And again, Gilborn or Professor Gilborn urges that when white or when black students underperform, it's often blamed on their families, culture, or attitude rather than systematic barriers. But when white students fall behind, the system is seen as the problem, creating a double standard that pathologizes black students and excuses systematic failures. We are talking about British schools. White victimhood narrative reinforce negative stereotypes about black students, such as they are unfairly advantaged by diversity policies, they get special treatment due to political issues. This fuel resentment and racial tension in schools, making the environment more hostile for black students. Because, for example, as you have your parent as a working class parent, white working class parent, and you are being told that your child is not doing well in school because of this minority or because of these black students. So you, as the white working class parents, you will sit down in a meeting and say, now, this is our country and we are doing the most here. But they are focusing their point on black students. What we need to do, we need to focus on our white student. Now the system will be changed and they will stop dealing with the real problem, and they shift their focus to white student. And this will lead to stereotypes on black students, you know. So I think that's how system is being created. I once said system is a long con. This, what we see of white supremacy, racism, and everything is a long con that started way back. And they created this problem, and right now, they will tell you it's because of this, and that's why this is happening. But they are the one who created the problem so that they can bring a solution, and solution is to be racist towards these black people. Solution is to neglect these black students. And there's a lot of doctors who have talked about it. Dr. Nicola have talked about it. And I may say someone like Professor Heidi Safia Mizia has focused on race, gender, and educational inequalities, and she is known for her work on the experiences of black and ethnic minority students and teachers, and how race and gender biases affect educational outcomes. You get that? We have a lot. We have someone like Professor Kalwant Bofal, and he focuses on race, ethnicity, social justice in education. And she has written on how institutional whiteness and exclusion operate in higher education, especially affecting black and minority ethnic students. And this is the real deal. Problem is being created. We are being for example, you are being told, you know, you are the problem, okay? are failing exams, and you are getting less. And the problem is because our teachers have focused so much on this black student because of how the politics is. We cannot do something. We can't do anything on your white students because we are focusing on the black students, and that's why the government want. That's the narrative they will tell you. And because you are a parent there, you will be like, okay, this is our country, and we need to focus on our white students. Now they will create another system to figure out how they will come and handle that situation, and they will create a victim, a white student victim, so that they can come up with ideas to cater it. Now, creating white victim affects black students so much. We have something like mental and emotional impact to the black students. Constantly navigating a system that sees you as either a problem or a threat can damage black students' self-esteem, can damage sense of belonging, can damage trust in educators. Your self-esteem is down because you are being constantly told that you are the problem, but you ain't the problem. It will reduce policy focus on racial justice, and it will create just chaos, and racism will increase in these universities. Now, by centering white grievances, educational policies can start to prioritize leveling up white working class boys, even when black students experience deeper and more systematic barriers. Okay? So this just means fewer, or this just means that directly addressing anti-black racism or systematic bias will be so hard, and they'll be only focusing to the white people. Now, I may say this, that I've learned something today, and this one thing that I've learned is how to bring about racism in our schools. First, we create the problem, and this problem will be seen like white students are suffering, white students are not eating well, are not getting good diet, are not passing the exams simply because we are focusing on the minorities, and the minorities will be seen as the problem. So what we'll do to eradicate this problem is to start focusing on these white students and neglecting the black students and saying they are the problem. That's the whole point I've got from this video. And we are being told lies, a lot of lies. For example, racism does not exist in UK schools anymore. But this is one of the biggest and most damaging myths and lies that are being told, because in reality, students of color and or minority, especially black, Southern Asian, or from just minority students still report racial bullying, and we have seen it too in videos. We see in social media how these things is being done. So when we are being told that there is no more racism in this school, or racism does not exist, it hinder all the energy that we keep to fight the racism. So people will be reluctant, and while they are reluctant, these students are continuing to to have bigger and bigger problems, emotional problems, and mental problems, because no one is up to them, because the system is saying that there is no more racism. Now, we have racist comments too in school, and often dismissed as jokes. That's one of the lies, that this one are jokes, but they are racist comments, and minimizing the harm they cause and discouraging victims from speaking up. And this allows a toxic environment to persist. Okay, when they say racist comment and they say it's a joke, so these students cannot report, and we cannot fight, because they'll be like, okay, we were just playing, we were joking. But that is a lie. They mean it when they say such words. Okay, another lie we are being told from the UK system schools is, for example, teachers treat all students equally. But that's a lie, because many teachers aim to be fair, and consciously bias still plays a role in expectations, discipline, and how ability is perceived. Studies have shown black students are more likely to be seen as disruptive and less likely to be entered for higher tier exams. There is no need for anti-racism education. This is one of the myths that we are being told. We are being told there's no need for this because there is no racism. So some people urge, or some urge, that UK schools are already inclusive and that there is no need to bring race into it. And that's why this Professor Gibson, while he was starting his point, he said that I'm so happy to be called here to talk about race because I'm not allowed or have not been called, or they can't call me in these schools to talk about race. Without teaching about racism or colonization, empire, migration, and systematic racism, students are left with a narrow and often view of history and society. So it is so hard to know the history, to know the society, to know your culture, and etc., etc. Now, another lie that we are being told is that minority students just need to work harder. Now we are being told black students need to work harder, minority need to work harder, and this blame individuals instead of acknowledging systematic or structural inequalities. Such as poverty, lack of representation, or lower teacher expectation. So we have more lies that we are being told in these schools, and that is how the system has posed on this. Okay, so I think we need to dig deeper and have these educations, and that's why I thank this platform and these professors who are working out here and talking about these issues. Okay, so just on the comment section, tell me, do you think that racism has ended in these schools? Do you think so? I'm so happy that Professor Gibson has talked about this, and a lot of white professors might or have to come out and say things how it is, because you may think, or sometimes we ask questions, where do these students learn racism and still maybe they are young? It's because it is starting from the root cause. Maybe the teachers or the system is being created to make sure they are racist over black people. Okay, there's a lot I've learned from this video, but I think I'll end there. Tell me in the comment section what you think about this video. I love you so much. Until next episode, peace out.